Thanks very much, David. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us at the Timpson Programme webinar series. My name is Andrew Brown. I'm a researcher on the Timpson Programme at the University of Oxford. I know many of you will be here before, but just in case there are some that are new to this webinar series, so a little bit about the Timpson Programme at the Rees Centre. The Rees Centre is a research centre at the University of Oxford, and we specialise in research around children in and around the care system, their education and their life outcomes, as well as outcomes for young people and adults who are also care experienced. And the Timpson Programme is one of the largest research programmes of its kind running at the moment. We're working with over 300 schools across the country in 25 local authority areas and working around understanding the impact of attachment and trauma awareness training in those schools. And we're evaluating that impact through pupil focus groups and staff surveys encompassing the entire range of the workforce in school. And at present, we're at the final stages of our data collection and already analysing and composing a series of working papers set to be published over the next few months. So keep an eye out for messages about those when they come. This webinar programme is part of the Timpson Programme as a whole, and we do these webinars every couple of months and available to view on the Rees Centre website afterwards. We also have a YouTube channel where you can find webinars and others from the Rees Centre. So it's very timely then, after that we're able to welcome Becky Brooks to the latest edition of the webinar series. Becky is the Education Advisor at Adoption UK, a former secondary school teacher and foster carer, now an adoptive parent. Her work at Adoption UK focuses on assessing the impact of education policy on adoptive families and adopted children and young people, and supporting education professionals with guidance, training materials and resources. She's also the author of the Trauma and Attachment Aware Classroom book, which is a must read, which I have here on my shelf and always to hand. She's also author of several Adoption UK reports, including Bridging the Gap, Better Futures and the annual Adoption Barometer. So we're very grateful that Becky accepted our invitation to present on transitions and change for care experienced young people in school. And I'll hand you over to Becky.
Thank you, Andrew, much appreciated, and I'm really delighted to be here this afternoon. This is a great opportunity, so thank you all for coming. I'm going to be talking to you over the next about 55 minutes about transitions and change, and why those can be sometimes incredibly difficult for care experienced children and young people. But before we get going on that, I wouldn't be a proper teacher if we didn't have a starter activity. So I wanted you to start off by just thinking about the number of transitions and changes a child's likely to go through in a typical day at school or nursery. And I will invite you to have a little think about it and then pop a number that you've come up with in the Q&A. And perhaps Andrew can give us a sense of the range of numbers that are popping up. So think about, don't think about before they leave home, but beginning with transition 1, leaving home in the morning, and then finishing with the final transition of going back through your own front door in the evening. Think about how often will they transition from one location to another during the course of their average day, and this obviously will be different depending what kind of setting you're working in. And when you've got a grip on that, then think about how often do you think they might transition from one activity or situation to another. I'll give you a minute. I'm looking for ballpark figures right now, not actual counting up, but if you can come up with some ballpark figures, how many transitions do you think a child will experience in a day? And then pop your ballpark figures in the Q&A and we'll see what comes up.
That's an interesting question. It's always danger of underestimating it, but I'm going to go for 20. But I could be largely underestimating that. But I suppose it depends what sort of transitions we're thinking about. But yeah, as Becky said, we've got 50, we've got 60. I feel like I'm at an auction. Any advance on 60 or anything less, maybe anything less. Yeah, we've got 100, 20 to 30. So we've got a full range, and some as few as 10. So I think there, Becky, we've got a range from anything from 10 to 100. How
I
does
think
that
that's
fit in with
fairly,
your...
yeah, and I think that any of those could be good answers, because I think it will partly depend on the type of setting that you're in. Obviously, if you're at a secondary school, you'd expect the children to be moving from classroom to classroom and from location to location quite frequently through the day. Whereas in a different setting, the children might spend most of the time in one classroom and not move from location to location quite as much. But they will have break times. They may go out into the playground and then back into the classroom. That's 2 transitions right there. And again, at lunchtime, they might go from the classroom to a dining area, from the dining area to a playground, from the playground back into the classroom. If you want to get really into the nitty-gritty, you could include the cloakroom or the toilets, or these are all locations where children might find themselves during the course of the day. And then if we think about transitions from one activity or situation to another, I'm thinking about those transitions where children were doing singing, but now they're doing sitting quietly on the carpet, or where they were doing a very physical or practical activity, but now they're doing a more sedentary, quiet, sitting still activity. And those kinds of transitions will take place. I mean, I'm thinking as a secondary school teacher, but those kinds of transitions will probably take place a few times a lesson. If you want to get really into it, a transition from working quietly on your own work to doing something in a group or doing something as a whole class with the teacher at the front. There are lots of transitions of location, activity and state that take place during a school day. And so when we're thinking about transitions, it's worth bearing in mind that children will go through many transitions at different levels during the course of their day, and that's not including all the transitional moments before they've arrived in your setting and what happens after that, obviously. We're going to focus on a bigger scale of transitions than that today, really, but I really wanted to get us thinking about the number of transitions and changes a child will experience in a normal school day, and it can be quite a lot. Now, I said it up front that transitions and change can be quite difficult for care experienced children, and I wanted to spend some time at the beginning exploring why that might be. I'm not going to give a completely exhaustive list, and obviously every child is different, every child responds differently to the experiences that they have had and to the mitigating factors that were in place around them. So there's no one description or one reason why this might be. But I'm going to give you an overview of a few of the perhaps the more common ones. Transitions can be tricky because sometimes children have conscious or subconscious memories of unpleasant and dramatic transitions in the past. And if you're a care experienced child, you will have these kinds of memories, even if you were not old enough to remember it when it happened, but you will have stored some kind of memory of it. And I'm thinking back to when I was in fostering, I had children brought to me direct from the police station with no notice, direct from hospital after a very traumatic period in hospital, then not returning to the home that they knew, but coming to a total stranger's house. I've had children brought in various states of distress, with more or less notice. Often when children have first come into care, it's done as an emergency. There is little preparation for anybody, including the carer. And even with very young children, I have, for instance, as a foster carer, picked up infants from hospital within a few days of them being born and brought them away from there and brought them to my home. Even for very young children, these transitions are life altering and hugely dramatic. Many children will have experienced multiple moves through the care system before achieving a more permanent place, whether that's through adoption or long-term fostering or some other route. And all of these can erode a child's trust and their ability to form healthy attachment relationships, even if they don't remember them. And so transitions in school can trigger these deep, sometimes very buried feelings of loss, fear of abandonment, that the child may not even really be able to articulate. Triggers can be linked to particular times of year. A child may have a deep sensory memory or a conscious memory of unpleasant experiences linked to sensory input because of a particular weather. Okay, so remembering walking through the snow down the path away from the contact centre the last time that you saw your birth parent, the crunching feeling of the snow under your feet, the cold of the snow, of the cold air into your nose. These deep sensory triggers can be stored even in a very young child, and even if the actual memory of that moment may not be easily brought to mind, the repeat of that sensory information coming in again can trigger all those things. And we kind of know that, don't we? Because we often talk about smells being linked to memories and how a smell can trigger a memory. Many of our sensations can trigger memories. When I was a child, I always used to think that Christmas had a particular smell. I don't know if it was a plastic Christmas tree or what it was, but there was a smell of Christmas. And if I ever smelled a smell like that, it immediately made me think of Christmas. But if you've had terrible experiences of Christmas, then the smell of Christmas is not going to trigger pleasant memories for you. So trauma responses linked to transitions can be heightened at these times of year. so it's something to think about in terms of the school calendar, because we often have things in the school calendar that are unusual or full of transitions themselves at memorable times of year, like Christmas, for example, and let's have a nativity play and let's have a school fair and let's have lots of these other things going on. And meanwhile, there are lots and lots of things going on that are relating to a child's memories of things that may have happened around Christmas, and all of these can lead together to create a lot of difficulty around transitions. I mean, I'm covering a huge amount of stuff there in one point, but that's all of that is worth looking into. The second thing I wanted to mention was the need to be in control. Children who don't feel safe or who have historically not felt safe often have a strong desire to control their surroundings and control what's going on, because that's their survival strategy. If you can't trust the adults that are meant to be caring for you, and if you can't trust the circumstances that you're in, you know, a route to survival is to be as much in control of what's going on as possible. And change threatens the child's sense of being in control. They might fight to maintain the current state rather than change and move on to a new thing. And even though they might go through the same transition many times before, like the transition through the school door at the start of the day, anxiety clouds our ability to think logically about what is happening. Okay. And I might as well say anxiety and fear. So as a child, this is unrelated to transitions, but I was really frightened of dogs. It did not matter what logical explanation people gave to me about dogs. None of that mattered, because I was out of control, frightened of dogs, and there was no amount of calming words you could say to me that would make me not be frightened of dogs. I was frightened of dogs. And so when children are experiencing this high level of anxiety and fear, even though they may have experienced this before, and logically they know that actually they like it when they get into school, and it's nice to see our friends, and the many things that we say to them, they're not able to take that on board in that moment. So the strong desire to be in control can have impacts around times of transition. It can cause children to want to hold on to what they already have rather than move on to something new and different, even if it's something they've done before many times. A third thing that can make transitions more difficult can be environmental triggers. And we've talked about this a little bit earlier when I spoke about smells and sounds that might be linked to particular traumatic memories. But actually in school, a period of transition is often accompanied by a change in the level of activity. So at the end of the lesson, there might be more noise and bustle in the classroom. Children are packing away, moving about. There might be crowding and noise in the corridor or the lunch queue, the smell and the sound of the canteen, where children are going to be eating. And for children who, particularly those who may have difficulties processing sensory information generally, managing this change of state and the increase or decrease in sensory input that comes with it can add additional layers of difficulty to managing the transition. And that works both ways. And we'll talk about this a little bit more about internal state in a moment. But that works both ways, changing from a quiet state to a busy, crowded one, but also going from a crowded, noisy, active environment to a quiet, still and calm environment. These are both environmental changes that can enhance the difficulties that some children experience through transitions. I'm going to move on. We're not done. We've got more reasons why transitions might be a little difficult. I think separation, if I'd have asked you to list reasons why transitions were difficult, I suspect many of you would have popped separation anxiety or issues around separation into the Q&A, because it's a common thing, it's an expected thing for children, because it's a normal developmental stage to have separation anxiety. And certainly with our young children, when we've taken them to nursery or somewhere when they were quite little, we expect them to experience some separation anxiety. But for some children, this can persist long beyond toddlerhood, and especially for those who've experienced several changes of caregiver and disrupted attachments. School-aged children with separation anxiety may experience physical symptoms, headaches, nausea, vomiting in anticipation of this separation. Separation anxiety can also manifest in a different way as, for example, a persistent fear, a fear of being alone, or ongoing anxiety about somebody that you care about becoming ill or even dying. So these can become huge feelings for children to manage. And I think it's really important, where we're working with children whose early years have been incredibly disrupted and who may not have had the sort of nurturing input that we might expect in order for them to develop according to a pathway that according to a sort of standard pathway, that we need to be looking at the child's stage and not their age. So we might say, well, this child is whatever age, we wouldn't expect them to have separation anxiety anymore. but actually if you look at what's been built into them in the years before, it's actually entirely possible that separation anxiety is a completely normal situation for them to be experiencing at this point in their lives, because that's the developmental stage they have now arrived at. Executive functioning is becoming one of my favourite things to talk about. I think partly because my executive functioning skills are not the greatest. Executive functioning skills are what we use not only to do our household admin or our school admin, but also to plan and anticipate future events, and to link cause and effect, and to manage time. Now, even within that list, you can see straight away that there is a huge amount of those skills are needed to manage a transition, to plan, to anticipate what's coming next, to link cause and effects, and to manage time. If your executive functioning skills are not very strong, and you're not managing your time effectively, you're not linking cause and effect, you're not anticipating future events, then transitions can come upon you without warning, even if those around you might consider you to have been adequately warned. That might not have filtered through to you. So when the transition arrives, it comes from nowhere, it triggers all these anxiety-fueled responses, difficulties planning for and anticipating what will come next, inhibits the child's ability to move on to the next thing. And that links back to what I said earlier about the need to control what's going on. And this can be even exacerbated if, for instance, the child feels rushed to complete one activity before moving on to another, and it sets off a whole spiral of anxiety about that. So I'm thinking about even a small transition like, you know, we finished this piece of work and now we're moving on to this next thing we're all doing together. A child that struggles with executive functioning may not manage the time very well to do that piece of work. They may not, if you say you've got 5 minutes left, they don't necessarily have a sense of what 5 minutes is, and how much they could even get done in 5 minutes. So it's quite, you can see in that state, it can be quite easy for children to set off with panicking about trying to get it finished and rushing to get it done. And sometimes you'll see children just refuse to move on from one activity to another. But sometimes executive functioning skills can be at the root of that. The point about regulating the internal state is partly linked to what I was saying earlier about sensory processing difficulties and coping with the sensory change, the environmental changes that take place around children when transitions are happening in school. But regulating the internal state is particularly important when you're transitioning from situations involving a high level of activity and involvement to those involving a quieter and less physical level of involvement, and vice versa. So one of the really important aspects of sensory processing, and I don't want to talk about this for too long because it's not what this thing's about, but one of the really important aspects of sensory processing, which is often overlooked, is this our internal sense of interoception, which is the way that our body interprets the things that our body is doing. And if we can interpret sometimes our body correctly, it helps us to recognize the state that we're in. So for instance, you may recognize that sweating, trembling, heart rate increasing, breathe rapid and shallow as being that's because you're afraid or you're anxious, or you may recognize those things and be able to logically think, gosh, I'm feeling very nervous and afraid, I should take some deep breaths, I should do whatever it is I do to calm down. For children whose sensory processing abilities is perhaps not as developed, they may not recognize those feelings, those internal feelings, for what they are, and certainly then can't use that information to inform themselves about their own internal state. And so that makes it more difficult for them to regulate their internal state. So what you get is children that are very excited, and then when it's time to stop being excited and be calm, they're basically just still excited. Okay, and you get the other side as well, children who are very flat in affect and maybe not projecting very much emotional involvement in anything, and even when you kind of ramp up the activity, still don't seem to match their level of engagement with what's going on, and some of that can be around difficulties regulating this internal state. And so sometimes children need support to get themselves from uber excited running around in the playground having a whale of a time to sitting quietly on the carpet or in a chair doing some quiet work. And finally, fear. At the root of the problem, many of the problems around transition is fear of being left alone, fear of losing someone or being lost, fear of failing, fear of losing control, fear of the next thing that's happening, whatever it is, fear of being punished because you didn't finish your work in time, or you might not finish your work in time, fear of exchanging a known situation for a potentially unknown situation. There can be a lot of fear involved, and children that have experienced many environments of high levels of fear have learned to fear. And fear can be a healthy survival thing. If a bear is running towards you in the woods, you should probably be a little bit afraid. But if it's, you know, if it becomes a factor of a child's life, that they're permanently in a state of fear, or often looking for things to fear, then fear will raise its head at everything that's difficult or unusual, and that includes transitions. Now I'm going to stop talking briefly and just show you these three children. We've got Chloe. Chloe is 8, but she still cries when her foster carer drops her off at school. We've got Jade. Jade is stubbornly refusing to pack her work away, even though the class has finished that and is ready to move on to the next task. And Carl. Carl comes in from break time like a whirlwind every day and disrupts the whole class. We've all taught Carl. So what I wanted for you to think about for a moment was, I've put the list. These are the 7 things that I've mentioned: conscious and subconscious memories, control, environmental triggers, separation anxiety, executive functioning, this internal state thing, and the last one, fear. And what I wanted to do for a moment was, if you think about Chloe, let's just think about Chloe for a moment. Off the top of your head, without too much thought, would you want to pop in the Q&A which of those issues on the list might be a problem for Chloe at that moment, who still cries at the age of 8 when her foster carer drops her off at school? I'll give you a little minute.
Thanks, Becky. I was about to put my thumb on the scales there, but I'll just hold off for a small second whilst people find their keyboard and tap in. But it's a very interesting thing to think about, because, you know, the range of things that might be affecting children in those transitions is really quite remarkable. And it, you know, covering things from, you know, the location, the activity, the state of the environment and internal. But it's it's fascinating to stop for a second and just think about all of the things that might be happening. So I see there's several votes for separation I see so far.
Yeah,
which is good, and fear is another one. Yes, but it's I wonder if there's a, you know, that subconscious memory might be there as well. I suppose is connected to the separation.
Yeah, I would say that environmental triggers at the start of the school day can be a big factor for some children. The start of the school day can be noisy, crowded, you know, and that can be quite difficult for some. I don't want to spend a really long time on these, but if we could perhaps have a think about Jade, who doesn't want to pack her work away even though the class is ready to move on. Does anybody have any want to pop something in the chat about what they think is happening there?
I suppose it's tempting to think on a positive note that she's so involved in her work she doesn't want to finish. But do
you know what, it could well be that.
It could be, but then maybe it's not such an unreasonable thing to think about, that there's that control element that she wants to finish, and she needs to finish something, because that's a thing. And I've certainly encountered children who find it very anxiety provoking when they can't finish something. Everything has to be in that box before they can move on to the next one. So maybe that's not such a irrational thought after all. But yes, we've got some more. Yes, there's control of subconscious memory coming there. There's some executive functioning coming in, which is another fascinating thing to think about. That part of the brain that's involved in the planning and understanding of time. You mentioned, Becky, which I thought was very important. When we say just a minute, or we've got 5 minutes to go before lunchtime, what does that mean to any child, let alone a child who's, you know, still trying to find those things difficult to work out? Well done. We've got a very interactive audience today. This is very heartening. Well done, everybody.
Oh, lovely. I like that. Let's have a little think about Carl. Carl comes in from break time like a whirlwind every day and disrupts the whole class. Again, it's you could be tempted to think almost that they're all of the above.
may be going on in a whirlwind in itself, but seems to me like control might be an important one there.
I think so. I think with Carl, and I think with Carl, we really need to consider his internal state and his ability to regulate himself and move from an exciting activity to a calmer activity. And
I suppose that takes a fair amount of energy for a child to not only recognise, if they can, the change and to deregulate, but actually the thing of deregulation, I would imagine, takes quite a bit of emotional energy to do. Well,
yes, I think so. Particularly with the issue about managing your own internal state or regulating yourself. Regulation is a thing that is learned between infants and caregivers really early on. So this is something that's a classic thing that can occur within the whole attachment cycle. But the regulation is it's a kind of serve and return thing that can go on between caregivers and infants, and we do it actually all of the time. Even your toddler comes to you crying because they've hurt themselves. You meet them, you get down on their level, you look in the face, you say, oh no, oh that looks really sore, and then as time goes on, you have a soothing voice and you bring your tone of voice down, and they begin to calm. And so the skills that they are learning to support them to recognize their own internal state and to regulate it really do occur and develop within the context of a child's early relationships. And so it's not difficult to see that when a child's early relationships are either not ideal or heavily disrupted, that this learning just isn't taking place. And I think if we put that in a different context, and I asked you to think about the speech and language development of a child that was never spoken to or only infrequently spoken to, we would understand straight away that a child's speech and language development would be delayed if they weren't given those opportunities for being spoken to, for participating, hearing language and joining in with language, and the serve and return of parent to child, making babbling noises even at infants. It's all part of the development, because this is development that's taking place during infancy, and at the same time this other development, your sensory development, and your ability to regulate yourself, those things are taking place within the context of those relationships as well. And so I think we kind of imagine that we just magically learn how to do that, or we just magically are able at a certain age to do a certain thing. And in fact, the other day who had been told that their teenage child should be able to control their emotions by now. Well, she should be able to control her emotions by now. And in one sense, well, yes, the expected level of emotional control from a teenage girl might be more than what we're seeing, but it doesn't happen by magic. These things develop over a life course, and the fact is she can't, and what are we going to do about it, kind of thing. Which brings us on to where I'm going next, because I almost feel really, when I'm talking to education professionals, that at this point I could almost stop, because the ability, the bread and butter of an education professional is, once we understand the nature of the problem, where the problem might be coming from, it's to devise innovative and flexible solutions to that problem. And I almost feel that if I said to you now, there we go, that there are 7 reasons why transitions are really difficult, you immediately can begin to think of quite a lot of things that could be done to support children to manage transitions that are having these difficulties. But that would only be half a webinar, and I'd feel like I was giving you short change. So I am going to talk to you about a few practical things that could be put in place. But I know as educators that within your context and with the children that you work with, and using your own expertise, you will be able to come up with your own ideas or adapt these, or even have your own that will work best for you and in your settings. But I'm going to think about 3 common transitions, and we'll start with transitions from one activity to another. So some really kind of basic things. Predictable routines. Okay, so there's a misconception when we talk about trauma and attachment aware education, that we sometimes are imagining that we should never have any expectations of children, and they should just, it's a free for all and we can excuse everything. and that there will be chaos and disaster in the classroom, and you know, that couldn't be further from what's needed. Children who have experienced trauma and destructive attachment really benefit from and thrive on strong, predictable routines and boundaries, clearly laid out, and we know where we are, and those need to be in place. It helps children to feel safe. It helps children to feel secure in what's happening and what's coming next, and particularly with regard to transitions, it helps children to develop the cause and effect thinking, which can so often be at the root of struggling with transitions, and by the way, incidentally, struggling with behaviour, because rewards and consequences charts and such like are not going to work for you if you don't have a strong ability to link cause and effect thinking. Right, because it will make the detention you're receiving on Thursday will in no way in your mind be linked to that thing that you did on Monday. All right, so we really need to find ways to support children who are struggling, to work with them in ways that will develop cause and effect thinking while still maintaining the boundaries and the routines that we know are so important. But difficulties are more likely to arise in transitions if they are rushed and they seem to have arrived from nowhere. And so strong predictable routines around regular transitions, beginning and end of the lesson, beginning and end of the day, beginning and end of lunchtime, those kinds of things, that will really help to smooth the way and will encourage development of this cause and effect thinking. Written or timetables, not every child likes a visual timetable, to be honest, but as appropriate, and for the whole class or for individual students, but they should show what's happening now, what's coming next, and what will be later. Not every child needs this or would benefit from it, but it's something that's worth considering. You can put timings on it if the child's able to make use of that information. Timetables can provide an element of predictability and support children to prepare what's coming at the other side of the transition, right? So now we're doing this, then we're going to pack away, then we are going to do something. It allows them to feel more in control of what's going on. I guess warning of transitions is really linked to both of those first two, so it's to reiterate this really. And this can be a verbal reminder, but that doesn't always cut through if a child's in a state of anxiety or stress about something. There could be a visual timer, you could have a sound and audible indicator, a beep, and now there's 5 minutes to go. It could be a sand timer, what are they called, like a timer, but with the sand running through, so you can see the sand running through and you get a sense of how far through you are, the time that you've got left. And these warnings of transitions need to be accompanied by instructions about what we're going to do. So thinking about the girl in the previous example who wouldn't finish her work off, couldn't cope with the session ending and the work not being finished. Well, what are we going to do with unfinished work? If it's okay if you don't finish your work, this is the box where we put the work that's unfinished, and you will be able to come back to it on such a day, or you know, we've got a plan for you if you didn't manage to finish, and it can just reduce anxiety about those things. Finally, on this one, creating a sensory activity. So this is really thinking about children who have a particular difficulty when the transition involves a change of state from active to passive or the other way, but also as well when, and let's be realistic, this happens a lot, when it involves transitioning from a thing we like doing to a thing we don't really like doing. Okay, so my children, as with all children in the world, really don't like transitioning from the park to anywhere, actually. They don't want to leave the park. The park is fun. Whatever else is coming, we don't know what it is, but it can't be as fun as the park, so we don't want to leave from the park. And I shamelessly, absolutely shamelessly, always return home from the park via the shop, the corner shop. Okay, because I am calling this like a transitional activity to help us get from one internal state to another internal state. Okay, and sometimes we just might buy a drink or something. We're not going mad, but we often will pop to the corner shop. So we all do that as parents, don't we? I want you to leave the park, and when we get home you can have a hot chocolate, or I want you to leave the park, and when we get home we'll watch that thing together, or we'll do that thing. So we're giving children a transitional moment to help them through the transition, and particularly where there are problems regulating internal state. If you can insert a short activity between one thing and the next that is designed to provide a neutral pivot from one activity to another, that can really help some children. So thinking back to Kyle, who came in from the playground like a whirlwind, full of buzzing with energy, can Kyle be the one that moves the chairs if the chairs need moving, or carries the books if the books need carrying? Kyle needs to get some of his physical energy out, but there are ways for him to do that with a short, neutral activity that can help him to pivot from running in the playground to sitting on the carpet or sitting in his seat. And it could be a less energetic but still physical activity can get him, can give him the proprioceptive input that he's craving and move him from the very excited state to a less excited state. You might consider reading a short poem to the children, something that with a call and response that they can respond to you in, or singing a little song. My children used to sing. We used to sing a tidy up song when it was tidy up time. It was an awful song, but we used to sing it. It gave us a routine around the transition, and it helped them to begin to change their internal state from one state to the next, you know. And the few minutes that you might lose in that activity, you might more than recover if it means that you get through your transition fairly smoothly and you can get the children into class or out of class as needed. So to move on to another kind of transition, so transitions at the start and the end of day, these are enormously important transitions for children and can often be a flashpoint. And what I would say about this, and this is really important, this is from this is something that was in a book by Dr. Emma Gore-Langton, Becoming an Adoption Friendly School, which you might have come across, and she said something in there, I'll paraphrase, but it was, when things are difficult, often the parent can think that the school is the problem and the school can think that the parent is the problem. Actually, the problem is the problem. Okay, and I'm saying that because flashpoints around transitions at the start and end of day can often lead to conflicts between school and parents or carers, for all kinds of reasons, but it's a rubbing together point of parents and carers and school staff, and it can sometimes lead to conflicts. And it's really important for us all to remember that the problem is the problem, not the child, not the school, not the parents. The issue, the difficulty, the problem with transitions is the problem. So again, always regular routines. These are always really important. And remember that an anxious child might need the routine explaining to them again, even though they've done it 100 times, because logic has flown out of the window. There are a lot of sensory and environmental triggers around the start and end of the school day. So arriving a few minutes earlier or a few minutes later, or going in at a different entrance or something like that, can take all of that stress out of a child's arrival, and can hugely reduce the difficulties that might be caused by environmental factors. Additional to that is the idea of having a key adult to meet and greet at the start and end of each day. So for children who are experiencing separation anxiety, who have experienced serious attachment disruption, school really needs to be a safe place, and they need really to develop secondary attachment relationships with somebody at school. So it needs to be a key adult. It doesn't need to be a teacher. It could be someone that works in the office, it could be the librarian, it could be the groundsman or the caretaker, or it doesn't matter. It's somebody with whom the child has a warm relationship to come and say hello to them at the start of the day and support the handover at the school door. And it gives the child the sense that they're being handed from one safe pair of hands to another safe pair of hands. They are moving into and out of a safe base. Linked to the kind of environmental excitement at the start of the school day, it can be a good idea to direct a child to structured activity immediately on arrival. So depending on what time a child arrives at school, there might be some time where they're milling about in the playground, running around, catching up with their friends. It's all very exciting. If you think back to Kyle doesn't need 10 minutes running around in the playground with his friends before school starts, because then he's going to arrive in the classroom on top notes, and you're going to have to bring him down, really bring his excitement levels down to get the school day started. If possible, if children can be directed to structured activities immediately on arrival, and preferably built into their day as a daily responsibility. This is your responsibility. I'd love you to, when you arrive at school, please, you may go straight to the classroom and take all the chairs down, or clean the board, or you can meet the groundskeeper and we're going to do this little bit of sweeping this thing, or I don't know, think about your own setting and what's available. But directing children to structured activities, preferably with somebody, with an adult, can really take the sting out at the start of the day. Transition objects from home can be really important. This is quite difficult during COVID times, and we know that a lot of settings have spoken to us and parents have asked us about this. How can we bring transition objects during COVID times? And that's been difficult. In the past, parents would perhaps send in a small soft toy, a handkerchief, perhaps with a spray of perfume or aftershave on it, even a photograph or some little trinket from home. which serves to remind the child that they're not forgotten by their parent and they will get picked up by the end at the end of the day. It reassures the child they're held in mind. But even during COVID times, we've seen some parents with really innovative ideas, and a common one that I've seen parents doing is drawing a little heart on their wrist and then drawing, or even a little cross for a kiss on their arm there, and drawing one in the same place on their child's arm. Okay, at any point in the day, you can just lift up, pull your jumper up, and there's that kiss from your mum or your carer or whoever, and you know they've got one on their hand as well, and they're looking at their little kiss and thinking of you, and you're looking at your little kiss and thinking of them, and at the end of the day, you'll be back together. And I mean, that wasn't my idea. That's something I've seen parents have come up with and carers shared on social media. And I just think it's lovely and COVID safe. And finally, I would just say, can we end the day on a positive note? You know, even if the day has gone absolutely dreadful, there've been loads of incidents. Pick-up time, I'm sure you realise this. Pick-up time is not the time to discuss this, because for the child, the fear of that conversation taking place will mess up their whole day and make the home to school transition very difficult and something to fear, and we really don't want that. Incidents that take place, obviously communication needs to happen between parents and carers and teachers, but this is where really well organised homeschool communications come into play, by email, telephone, or homeschool book, or whatever system is working for you in your setting. But if you think of a child has a misdemeanor and gets in trouble at the start of the day and then spends the whole day thinking about being picked up and thinking about the teacher, can I just have a word with you, to their parent, and the walk of shame across the school. Parents are not a big fan, to be honest, but for the child as well, that is a harbinger of doom for the end of the day, and it creates very great difficulties for them at that pick-up time, which really needs to be a calm, safe time for a child to be handed from one safe space to another. The conversation needs to happen. It maybe doesn't need to happen then. Okay, the final type of transition we're going to just spend a moment looking at is transition from term time to holidays and back again. I think what's important to say about this is that holidays are not always great for all the children, and if you work in education, you will know that. This is something I don't really need to tell you. Some children are not having a great time in the holiday. Holidays can be extremely difficult, especially ones associated with festivals or seasonal events from whatever tradition, and a lot of that will bring a lot of big feelings. Now, when we're talking about children who were previously looked after, we could sort of imagine that that's not the case anymore, because they've got a safe place to live now. But as we've discussed, the memories and the triggers of memories past still crowd up on these times of year. So transitions from term time to holidays can be difficult, especially at Christmas time, if it brings back painful memories. There is a huge expectation around these big festivals, whether it's Christmas or Hanukkah or whichever festivals are being celebrated in your home or have previously been celebrated. There is an enormous expectation for everybody to have a great and amazing time. And that makes it even worse if that's not how it is for you, or not how it's been. It can bring back really terrible, painful lives. If children are changing class after school or school after the holidays, so if this is an end of year transition, there will be some big feelings involved, and anxieties about that may begin to surface before the term ends. So the first thing is to acknowledge that holidays are not always something that children are really, really looking forward to entirely. A lot of them are looking forward to it in one sense, but on the other hand, there may be big feelings being raised because of it. It's worth considering whether you can keep school routines as normal as possible. Transitions and change are difficult, and periods approaching holidays are already having a big transition coming, because we're about to go on holiday, and after that we might be changing school or changing class. But within the last 2 to 3 weeks of term, if you're also crowding in a load of trips, special events, special visitors coming, school fair, nativity rehearsal, all of the things that can happen towards the end of term, timetables overturned, Bill, we're going to film today with popcorn, we're having all different things, and many of these things are meant to be nice things that are pleasurable and enjoyable for children, and they are, but they are all involve transitions and change right at the point when there's going to be a huge transition and change. So any changes can create anxiety for children, especially if they have difficulty with executive functioning or sensory needs. If you can, try to keep key elements of the school day exactly the same, regardless of what time of year it is. So that might be your start of the day routine is always the same, the way you do registration or whatever. It might be the lunch routine, it might be your end of the day routine. Try to keep anchor points in the day where you are just doing what you will always do, even though what's gone on in between might be a little bit difficult. The same kind of transition object idea that can work from home to school can also work from school to home. So if a child is going off on holidays but will come back to the same class or the same school afterwards, taking a small transition home object home from school can reassure them they are held in mind and that they will be coming back and visiting that place or seeing that person again. And it needs to be something that's inexpensive and that if it gets lost or broken, nobody will be at all upset. So the teacher's pencil or something like that. I know a lot of schools have pets and soft toys and school plants and all those kinds of things, but it needs to be a low pressure item, really, so that there's no fear around it getting lost or broken. Indirect contact during the holidays can perform the same function. This doesn't have to be a big deal. A postcard home. I hope you're having a lovely summer holiday. I'm looking forward to seeing you when you come back to school in September, and we will do X, Y, Z. I'm looking forward to seeing you when you come to school in September. We're going to be reading a great book together, or we're going to be something. Okay, so something that links the past to the future, and that can be extremely helpful through any holiday if the child's returning to the same school and we're seeing the same people again. And I would just say to be prepared for some regression at the start of a new term. Two things can happen. There can be an increase in unwanted behaviour at the end of term. And sometimes children will begin to reject you before they have to lose you. You know, sometimes even if you've had a good relationship up to now, children can sort of act out towards you. It's not personal. It's the impending change. It's the impending loss of you, and that can sometimes be quite hard to take. But at the start of the new term, there can also be some regression. So separation anxiety that you might have thought you'd sorted that out last year may reappear with a vengeance after the school holiday. And the transition back to routine after what might have been quite a free and easy holiday time can also pose challenges for some. So this is a huge change of internal state from maybe 2 to 3 weeks of, or even longer in the summer holidays of I don't know, playing in a garden, watching TV, being on screens, having plenty of free time to choose to do what you want, and then coming back into the routine and the order and the system of school can be a huge transition and change that can cause some children to revert back to behaviours that served them well in the past that you may have thought of being over. I'm going to give you something else to think about now. I don't particularly want you to write anything in the Q&A about this. I just want you as a final thing to think about what your setting does to support transition. Don't try and think about it all right now because there isn't time, but as a going away question, I want to leave it with you as a parting homework, let's call it. Is it possible for you to have a think about your settings procedures for supporting transition? For the three we've talked about activities, but also particularly I'm looking at from one class or year group to the next. For students who are new to the school, and I'm saying that one because all schools have something in place for transitioning new students to the school. But can we have a look at it? And for students who are leaving your school and moving on to the next setting, are there any amendments or additions? Is there anything you would want to do, change, add, or alter to make sure that your school's policies and procedures are supporting care experience and adopted children, and frankly, a lot of other children who find transitions difficult for all kinds of reasons? Thinking through the 7 things that I listed, and there are more, that can impact and make transitions so much more difficult for children who are care experienced. Is there anything that could be written in at a whole school policy level that would really support those children? Because much of what you might do to particularly support those children would really benefit them, and at the very best do no harm to anybody else, and actually probably benefit a lot of other children as well, that for different reasons will need extra support with transition. I'm going to just put this up because I would be remiss if I didn't suggest some extra resources you might want to look at. But I mean, this is by all means, it's by no means an exhaustive list. And I think we've got 10 minutes to see about any questions and comments, which is I'm quite pleased with that. Actually, 10 whole minutes.
Excellent timing. Thank you so much, Becky. Definitely food for thought there in so many areas, and it's good to give us something to think about as we're going on. Something that springs to mind for me, just as people pop their questions into the Q&A for Becky, and we can pass them on, is concern that thing about the meet and greet from the key adult. And again, this is something that isn't my idea. I saw this in a school I was visiting several years ago, where I think it was their pastoral manager who was the key adult for quite a few children in the secondary, or students in the secondary school, and she would have outside her office a block of lockers that, you know, students had lockers all over the school, but these block of lockers, they, you know, surreptitiously made those available for the students who might need to accidentally bump into the key adult in the day, so she could check in on them, so they could just nip into the classroom. And I thought that was a really great way of, you know, an obvious way of establishing that meet and greet, you know, sometimes by chance and sometimes, you know, by just sort of making their entrance into the day a bit more sort of convenient for that. So
that's really lovely.
Yeah, great. And again, I'd love to have thought of that, but we've got a few questions coming in now, so I might pass one of these to you. So we have, I think it's a comment someone's put in about introducing new teachers to students in advance of the change. So when I guess a child is transitioning between teachers, and when moving to the next school, about visiting the new school before you go, and bridging the known school staff with the unknown school staff. Becky, have you got a response to that one?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And also, if you're changing in primary school from class to class, and that's easy obviously to achieve, because the possibility is that the next teacher is one that's already in the school, although it's more difficult obviously, you know, if it's a teacher that's new to school. But when changing setting, this can be a huge thing. And I think really building this into transition days, that there are actually a range of teachers that it would benefit children to have met. For instance, if they're transitioning to secondary school, so yes, the form tutor, yes, the head of year, but also you know, teachers that those children are likely to spend quite a fair bit of time with, so pastoral staff, and if necessary the SENCO or special educational needs support teachers, or pastoral I've mentioned, and not only for children but also for parents too, to be proactive about making sure that parents know who, for example, the designated teacher is, and they've had a chance to meet, and those kinds of things, because it's going to secondary school is a transition for children and for parents and carers. It's a transition for everybody, and also really important in terms of being able to visualize and see what the setting and environment might look like, can really reduce a lot of anxiety. And this has been incredibly difficult to achieve during COVID times. A lot of schools have not been able to run the usual transition program, and it's been a real problem that some families have been very concerned about. But we've seen schools doing some really great videos and photograph sort of photo things on the website. This is your classroom, even down to this is the desk where you will be sitting, this is the place where you are going to hang, this is where your locker is. Really can be quite granular for some children to reassure them and to prepare them ahead of time, especially if it's not possible to have the number of visits that would be because of COVID that we would like. There's a school local to me that I actually was actually included in the book as a case study, and they identify children who may particularly find transitions difficult, and they have a system for doing that. I won't go into it all, but those families are allowed to visit the school as often as they like, from year 5. So they put on a very, not just whenever they like, but as often as they like. So they put on a large number of opportunities for transitioning children and their families to come and look around the school, and you can come to as many of them as you want, so that children have the opportunity to get as familiar with the layout and the environment in the school as possible. And they do a lot of other things as well, but I kind of like that. It's not just once, you've been once and then that's it. Best of luck in September.
Yeah, and I think often the size of the school, because often, you know, a primary school is often a little bit smaller than a secondary school. I mean, it depends where you're going, where you live, but you know, for for an 11-year-old, and some parents who've never experienced secondary school now, it's it's really quite overwhelming. Somebody has commented about the egg timer idea, liking the idea of watching the sands pass through the egg timer, which is great. But they also say that they themselves do meet and greet students across all years who are finding the mornings difficult in particular. But also she mentions the COVID aspect. It was good that you highlighted some of those things in your presentation there, Becky. It's played a big part on many students who actually preferred working at home and like the idea of working at home. And I imagine some of us are maybe not looking forward to going back to the office so much, but finding that home is maybe good or maybe not. I guess it depends on your home situation. Have you come across anything like that, Becky?
Yeah, definitely. We quite early in the pandemic, I mean really early, April, May of 2020, we put out a survey about experience of education during COVID-19. So it was the very early days. I expect things will move on after that. But at that time, 1 in 10 of, I think it was over 1,000 respondents. It was a lot of respondents. And these were parents and carers of previously looked after children, so kinship carers, special guardians and adoptive parents. So at that time, 1 in 10 were considering long-term home education after 6 weeks of home learning because they felt their children were experiencing benefits from being able to learn from whatever it was that they were experiencing being at home. We found that more than half of secondary school children were reported to be calmer and less stressed with the opportunity to work at home. And so, yes, for some children, the opportunity to work at your pace in your space has been a real bonus. And just as with working from home, it doesn't work well for everybody or every family. It's a place of privilege, isn't it, to be able to have space in your home for your child to do their work and to have the equipment they need and all of that. And not everybody obviously has all of that. But I work from home permanently. I haven't worked in an office now for many years, and I find it really incredibly suits me, and I find myself terribly productive. But and for some children that might be the same. And I do hope that as we struggle to sort of emerge from the COVID landscape, that some time is spent thinking about what we've learned and how appropriately some of that can be leveraged now for the benefit of children who do find some aspects of school incredibly difficult, because there is no doubt that some children have thrived in some ways. Sure,
it's a learning curve for all of us, isn't it? Someone's posted, I think they might be talking about their own child, but I think it's worth mentioning as a general point. If your child has an EHCP and is going to, you can name your educational setting on the EHCP, but that throws up some interesting challenges to do with transition. This person's highlighted that often they like to give very short notice before changes and transitions happen, but that may be sort of quite difficult in this respect, because it's good to go and visit schools and things like that. I guess that's throwing up another particular set of challenges for how much you tell children about the move, particularly if you're able to name and knowing how those systems can often not work in the quickest possible way. Is that something you've encountered?
Yeah, and I think for all the advice, well, I hesitate to use the word advice, but for all the pointers I've given of things you could try, I think it's really, not all children respond to this in the same way. So my own children, who are quite young, they're primary school age, if we're going to be having a transition or a change, I do not inform them of it well in advance, because it will be anxiety upon anxiety upon anxiety until the moment it happens. Even if we're going on a nice day trip or going to visit somebody, it doesn't work for us in that way. And so, whereas other children, I've got, I know other adoptive parents or other long-term carers will say that their children need loads of warning and plenty of time to prepare themselves. So it's different from child to child, and this is a problem when it comes to going to what school you're going to go to, because you can't hide the fact that this transition is coming. If yours is a kind of child that will get anxious and is best not told until quite near the time, you can't hide that the primary school is finishing and you're going to go to secondary school and you've got the entire 6-week holidays to worry about it and all of that. And so really it's not something that you can handle by okay, right, now we're going to, off we go, like and ripping it off like a plaster, because the anxiety will be building. There's nothing you can do about it. For previously looked after children in England, and I think in Wales actually, there is priority access to school places anyway. So if you don't have an EHCP, as a previously looked after child, your child will have priority access to the school of your choice, really. And in the normal admissions round at reception or year 7, it's pretty much guaranteed to get in. The EHCP complicates that because obviously you have to get the school named on the EHCP, and being previously looked after doesn't have any impact there at all. It either is or it isn't. And yes, sometimes the timing of that can be really difficult. And I'm aware of parents even now whose children haven't got a school place for September, and it already is September, and so that can make life extremely difficult. But where you do know well in advance, you can't hide this transition is coming for your child anyway. They already know about it, and so having the information well in advance, it gives you opportunity to try and mitigate the anxiety the best you can, and take advantage of whatever the school is offering in terms of transition.
Yeah, I guess it's a constant reading of children and their situation and what works, and we don't get it right all the time, but we certainly like to try our best to do that. And it's been so fascinating because I see we've just run a little bit over time, so I'm afraid we are going to have to draw this to a close. Perhaps we'll gather the questions in, perhaps, and maybe we can put up a response on our website or publish some responses to those if the questions are coming in. But it just remains for me to thank you very much, Becky, for coming today and presenting. We hope it's been interesting for everyone. It's certainly been interesting for us here, and just have time to reflect and think on those things. So thank you very much, Becky, and we'll hope to see you again very soon.
Yeah, thank you.